Interstellar reporter Danica Starr. Unto War by R.L. Lindrud. Chapter 1. Tell me you got that shot. October 4th, 29:45, 10:45 a.m. Danica tapped away, trying to squeeze some truth out of a bunch of ones and zeros, but it was not absolute truth that she was looking for. She sought the inner maxim, the mind, spirit, and soul inside of a given demographic in a particular range of income, all in concert to ease the sale of the story. Her manicured fingers, augmented ageless dermis, and perfect hair all prepared for the eventual request to go live. She flipped the controls like a conductor, footage zooming by, barely giving her long enough to look at it. But it worked that way. The scene flickered in and out of focus as she toggled through a dizzying array of playback options, three-dimensional, centralized VR, holographic, and stopped. Her bored expression changed to one of vision. She restarted the footage. The hologram displayed a child, an updraft lifting her hair, her dress tattered and burned soot on her cheeks, her eyes focused beyond the visible. The devastation created a backdrop no less dramatic. A flag, tattered, scorched, draped over a crashed ship. A death shroud. A flag depicted a prominent four-pronged spear pointed at 4 stars. The light of dusk created a natural fade-out while a gentle breeze caressed the scene. Danica wondered about the flag, a rallying point for the righteous. Her eyes focused beyond the holographic display, 1,000 ideas diverging in all directions. She shook it off and again gazed at the footage. This wasn't a pirate raid. There was real power behind it, Danica thought. Walter. So much talent wrapped in an idiot. She looked around and tried to figure out where she was, taking in the tangle of wires and electronics that made up her editing station. Recognizing the back of the ship, her news van, she raised an eyebrow, losing track of where she was, which is exactly why Walter always drove. She could feel the ship maneuvering, but thought that it wasn't anything serious. She rewound the footage. Again, the young girl in a dirty white dress, bloody, dazed, walking through the scene of devastation. The flag fluttered on the ship. A light flashed on a nearby monitor tucked away below her workstation. She reached out and tapped the screen. The footage of the little girl kept rolling. The screen popped with static like a channel transmission way out of range. Danica took a deep breath and closed her eyes as a man's face appeared on the screen. She didn't want to be distracted. She could feel 1,000 stories escaping her grasp and opened her eyes. "What do you want?" she said. Walter gazed around. He loved this cockpit. He had a full view from his command post, thrust out into the void. Look straight up, and you observe stars. Left, right, between your feet, only stars. He noticed an odd glare. The local star was aft. The ship's vector pointed toward a jump point, forming their escape from the madness and danger. Walter smirked at his half fishbowl. What is he? A fish in a spaceship? A space bowl? Fish space. He grinned. What the hell are you doing up there? He jumped. Walter still didn't like the idea of leaving the cockpit, but nothing was out there. He disengaged the drive and guessed at a safe trajectory, assuming everything there wasn't a ship, rock, or planet within 1,000,000 kilometers. Navigating the Vega star system was as safe as it got. Walter pulled the configuration lever, and the ship transformed. The cockpit rotated from a vertical to a horizontal alignment, allowing access to the rear cargo bay. He looked to his right as the second seat from below glided into place next to him. The rotation slowed. The rear access door came into view, and with a solid thunk, the ship locked into a horizontal configuration. He floated out of the pilot's ship, opened the hatch, and pulled his way through. I think we should go back. Walter put his fist on the bulkhead and bit his lip. We could take on maybe a dozen survivors. And get shot down in that mess? He glanced at the footage. Danica, that won't work, Walter said. I like the framing. Framing? I shot raw, multi-dimensional footage with all subjects in the proper orientation. You cut it down to 2 dimensions. Walter threw his arms and twisted uncontrollably in the microgravity. Shut up, Walter. I need you to open up a feed to the network. I want to upload this before we miss the news, Danica replied. We'll make the news? He grabbed the handheld to right himself. Yes, make the sector news and all the way to Earth. Danny, this is a long form. There is no way the network will pick it up, and why would Earth care? Walter said, just as a faint beep caught Danica's attention. We're going to go live here, Danica said. Walter watched her, staring at a small flat screen to her left. She shook her head and closed the footage. I've seen the footage too, Danny. I don't think this is live material. Pirates, dead, and missing refugees that won't sell. We need to get some combat footage. The words died in his throat. That's not your problem. And who said that this had anything to do with pirates? Danica half listened to Walter while the holographic solar system map sprang to life. Walter muttered about how the star system emergency broadcast said that it was pirates while he pulled over to the transmitter and fired it up. A humming motor told him that the antenna was extending and connecting logs streamed by on the screen. He found the final authorization, then a warning. System emergency data only. Top priority. All other traffic will be limited. We have a problem. Walter noticed Danica pushing something out of sight. She turned back to him, still not listening. She had that look. A shiver ran down Walter's legs as if about to fall. Danny, the EBS is shutting down local transmissions. We'll need to get to a jump point to send data. He leaned his head into her sight line. We can't transmit. We have to get out of here. He felt a lump in his throat. You're right, she answered. He flinched and turned to see her blank, distant stare. Okay, he said hesitantly. Great. The EBS doesn't shut down traffic for pirates. You're right. We don't have it. We need a hook. She looked back at the small screen, and he could see text formatted almost exactly like an EBS transmission. Get in the pilot seat. She reached into the mess of wires behind her and flicked a switch. Walter, about to say something, watched the blank holographic display change to a navigational chart. It zoomed out several times as Danica clicked and adjusted the controls. A red spot appeared in 3-dimensional image. What is that? The inevitable has come to pass. We don't have it. She turned to him. Walter, get in the pilot's seat. He stared. He knew that voice. The cold calm of a woman about to get them into danger. Walter put his foot against the bulkhead, kicked off toward the front, and pulled himself back into the cockpit. He flipped on the navigation, strapping in, and spotting a new waypoint on his display. He froze. Warp us there as fast as you can. Danica's voice squawked over his headset. Okay, he said, and powered the quantum drive, rubbing his shaking hands together. The back hatch snapped shut as the cockpit rotated to a vertical layout. The HUD flickered. He lined the ship up to the virtual lines, showing the direction, the travel, and engaged the quantum drive. A point of light appeared just a few meters in front of the ship. Like fireworks, streams of light flowed from the spot, and the ship's very existence began to squeeze into singularity. Then, everything snapped back. The turbulence stopped, and he watched the stream of quantum particles slide past. He exhaled. We'll be there in under 10 minutes. He leaned over to watch distant planets stream by. Quantum travel distracted Walter, making him feel as if he flew through water. Make sure the camera drones are ready, she said. They all check out, all green and ready to record, Walter explained. Good. Now start recording. Now? Walter rolled his eyes. Yes, jellyfish. Now. And as soon as we're out of warp, get back here and establish an uplink. But I already told you. Do what I say, and we might live through this. Walter stared blankly ahead. He took a deep breath and pulled up the cameras on display. Wait. Live through what? He said to himself. The ship exited warp, and Walter yawned the ship so hard he felt strained by the G-forces. He dodged something, then pulled hard on the control stick again. That was close. He throttled down, but the flotsam seemed to be moving in all directions as they'd just arrived inside a gigantic explosion. A shower of small metallic objects clattered on the hull. "I can't fly through this," Walter said, putting up a hand to shield his head. "Don't be so dramatic and follow this beacon." Danica's voice cracked over the comm. He glanced down at the dash. The display showed a flicker aft. He turned the ship toward the signal, and after a few minutes of flying around bits of metal and ship parts, the fighter loomed into sight. "What the hell?" He hit the comm switch. "Found it. What do you want me to do?" Danica didn't answer. He flipped over to ship. "This is KTRK, Terra. We are answering your distress beacon," Walter said, unsure why they were there. He repeated the call and heard a lot of static interference, or was it jamming? "Civilian crafts are all required to evacuate the system for your own safety," the man spoke in a terse voice. Walter didn't realize his ship drifted toward the nose of the fighter. "What the hell are you doing?" "1 more meter and I'll open fire." Walter put up his hands, but then quickly reached down, pulled the throttle back, and just as quickly put his hands up again. "Hey, we're just here to help." He tried to back off, using his knees to steer. "Shit. Is that a camera? I'll give you 10 seconds to get that thing out of my face." Walter thought he spotted the dot of a laser sight. "Keep talking to him," Danica said in a smooth voice over the comms. "Hey man, it's off. I swear. I was just responding to your distress call." Walter caught the pilot's name under the fighter's canopy and their call sign. Archangel. He flipped the view over so Danica could see. "Damn. What carrier are you based off? That's a serious ship you're in." "I do not require assistance from the press. You're jeopardizing your life and mine by being here." The man's voice held a sort of vitriol Walter was used to hearing. Walter scanned the devastation and knew a battle had taken place here. He took in a breath to reply and sputtered when he noticed the rear airlock open. He flipped the wing camera around and spotted Danica EVA out of the ship with an emergency grapple in hand. She fired it before he could say anything. The magnetic claw snapped onto the fighter. "God damn it, Danica." Walter, incredulous, held on as the ship lurched around as if they'd caught a fish way too big for their boat. "I apologize. I was ready to fuck off, but my boss has other plans." He pulled the camera controls over. He set the fighter as a target and allowed the computer to handle the capture. He took off his headset, the fighter pilot's angry reply still audible. He curved one eyebrow and noted the fighter bore no apparent damage. Walter pulled himself behind the pilot's seat and put on the helmet, checked his O2, and flipped the helmet comms over the ship. He peered through the hatch window. Danica left the rear hatch open, and he identified the grapple cables stretching into the black. "Jelly, goddammit, respond," Danica said. "I was putting on my helmet. Cameras are still up and running. Get drones out and capture this debris field. I want as much footage as we can squeeze in." "May I ask why you are antagonizing a heavily armed man who does not want our help?" He listened to the background static and flopped his head back in mock brain death. He reached over, pulled the drone panel out, and set it to a good spot to his left. He tapped on the screen. The status, power, lens type selected all and launched them. He watched as they mapped and recorded the wreckage. His mouth drooped as the pattern materialized. Entire ships were blown apart, but he could visualize the parts reassembling into a fleet. A shower of noise rattled on the hull and snapped Walter from his daydream. "Is he shooting us?" "Jelly, could you inform the UEE pilot that we are, in fact, unarmed?" Danica ordered. She didn't say please. Civility was not high on her priorities. Walter looked back at the command panel and spotted the blink of the other comms channel. He flipped it on. "To help. I'll strip your ship of every usable part I can find and leave you here." Walter glanced around at the ship graveyard outside. The panels looked clear, and the drones were still mapping the area. He depressurized the front cabin and opened the back hatch. The UEE pilot held Danica's arm with his right hand, pointing a weapon at her with the other. Walter held up his hands and let his body turn in place. "I'm not armed." "Are you happy now, Commander?" Danica said, her smirk detected over the comm. "I told you already, I am not a commander. I am Lieutenant Bullard." Bullard shouted at first, then steadied his voice. Walter tried to place the accent, but couldn't quite nail it down. "We shouldn't be exposing these instruments to a vacuum. We need to close the back hatch." Bullard pushed Danica in as the thrusters on his flight suit fired. "Any day now, Walter," Danica said. Walter closed the hatch and the ship began to pressurize. "So, you're not a commander, Commander. What flight wing are you with?" Danica said in a soft, silky voice. Walter tried not to roll his eyes. "Danica Star. The bird of prey would attack in all conceivable ways to achieve her objective. I'm not allowed to divulge that information," Bullard spoke. "Just making conversation, baby." "Walter, maybe we should get some food out. Are you hungry?" Danica took off her helmet and let her hair rise in the microgravity. Walter knew the routine. She prepared her hair carefully to look great in all conditions, even 0G. Walter pulled off his helmet and smelled the sweet spring-like scent. "Sure," Bullard answered, distracted by the elaborate mess of equipment crammed into the back of the ship, normally even more cramped with drones mounted to wall opposite to Danica's editing station. Walter smirked on his way to the almost empty food bin. "If we are marooned for some reason, we'll easily starve in hours." He pulled out a few food bars and with a gentle release, let them float over to Bullard. Bullard held his helmet and scanned around. He caught the bars and nodded to Walter, who nodded back as though they'd met at the gym or somewhere. "Do you often report in war zones?" Bullard asked in a polite manner. "I'm a reporter, baby. Sorry. Walter is just a pilot." This would normally cause Walter to call Danica a bitch, but he just caught what Bullard had said. "This is a war zone? At war with whom?" Walter sputtered. "You just missed the battle," Bullard replied, unable to hide the scornful tone. "And Vandals still patrol the area. It's a miracle that you've survived this long." Danica pulled herself to her computer station, then typed. "Vandal? In that case, then we should go," Walter suggested. "Do you really want the story here to go untold? Our fallen comrades' sacrifices will be nothing," Danica asked as she typed. Walter's stomach began to knot. "Our comrades? You could never understand," Bullard said. "What outfit are you with?" She stopped and turned her head, careful to flip her hair around. The whole thing was a calculated act that made Walter uncomfortable, but he couldn't afford to quit. Anything and everything for the story. "Scum like you never learn, do you, Danica Star?" Bullard replied, spitting out her name. The average soldier viewed Danica as a traitor, someone who would twist their stories and tell lies. Walter cringed at the thought of what Bullard may not know. He looked at Bullard and smiled. "Listen, we're just doing our job. Besides, she already knows the answer." Walter played his part. "What do you mean she knows?" Bullard pointed his rifle at Walter, who put up his hands and set off tumbling. Bullard glanced between the two as if insane. Walter grabbed a nearby bulkhead to steady himself. Danica pulled the top of her space suit off and grabbed it around her waist, leaving her a skimpy t-shirt. Walter raised an eyebrow. Bullard wasn't fazed. "So, what outfit am I from?" Bullard asked. "Military fighters require support ships," Danica said, then leaned back to look out to the front. "Or did your carrier get lost in battle?" Bullard drifted forward and looked out to the front. "No, she isn't here." "Did they run?" Bullard's gun barrel interrupted Danica. "I should have killed you the moment I knew who you were." He aimed the gun sight at her. "Why didn't you?" she asked. "You've ended the careers of some good officers." His grip of the rifle tightened. "Kill us now and you won't have anyone to assist you," Danica said. "You think I need assistance from the likes of you?" Danica stared into his eyes for a long moment. "You're Lieutenant Jacques Bullard. First in your class from Turan Naval Academy, 2940. You served on Essex, stationed in Davian, and I'm guessing that's when you met Conrad. That's Captain Rhodomanthus to you, Bullard growled at Danica's lack of respect. He seemed even angrier to Walter. He recruited you for his new assignment. He was to take the Pegasus-class carrier on a covert patrol of the Nyx to Oberon stretch, Danica said, and without looking, she reached over, turning on a nearby screen. I got your distress call, coded, difficult to detect, and meant for military comm traffic, not a reporter. I had just enough info to figure out where you were. I don't buy it, Bullard questioned in disbelief. No one gave us your location, Danica said, and gazed at her computer station. Walter felt the statement may not be completely true. A light flashed on a nearby panel. Walter reached out and tapped the warning. The message log stated active scanning nearby. He scrambled to the front and once in the cockpit, reached for the radar. A hand appearing from nowhere grabbed his wrist but an inch from the switch. Bullards. Danica floated in behind him. Whatever you do, do not turn your radar on, said Bullard. Walter glanced at Bullard's pale face. Bullard whispered and carefully set the radar to passive. The Vandal will not take prisoners. The HUD showed half a dozen radar pings off in the distance. Danica pushed off toward the back with such force that Walter felt his seat vibrate. Walter's breath became shallow. Danica had taught him many things, but the one thing that she said repeatedly was out of all races in the galaxy, the Vandal were the most barbaric. The Vandal attacked a UEE fleet, Walter said, trying to catch his breath. What do you think? Do you have anything else transmitting? He said in a strong but calm voice. Walter frantically started turning off systems and lights. He spotted the drones capturing footage and left them in a passive state. He directed the closest drone to monitor them from a distance, powering down the long-range transmitter. Everything's off, Danny. The cockpit went dark except for a few panels. Everything's off back here, too, she yelled back. So, those radar sources. Walter pointed to 3 pulsing dots. How did you know? Lucky guess. Bullard tapped on the pad. A radar frequency graph showed each source. That's not a UEE pattern. Can you record this? Maybe. Wait. Walter pulled out a recording device and attached it to the screen. This won't give you data, but it will at least show you the image. The dots on the display moved in soft curves. Then he noticed a light in the distance that corresponded with one of the pings. The light shone through the bits and pieces of debris like a flashlight in a forest. He didn't move a muscle. Reduce your life support as much as possible, Bullard whispered. Walter got up and opened the life support panel. His hands shook so much that he could barely dial the heat down. Our scrubbers can handle 3 of us for about a week, I think, he said. Bullard quietly laughed. My man, I say our odds are 10 to 1 that we last the next minute. I'll take that bet, Danica chimed in. Bullard and Walter turned. A faint light lit Danica and the editing station. She had a small single monitor on and typed at full speed, the rat-tat-tat coming from a ball-shaped keyboard. Bullard pulled himself to the back and Walter followed. Walter gaped. There it was, Danica's secret weapon. The reason she always knew where to go, even in deep space, and why she wouldn't let Walter snoop around in her equipment. She didn't bother hiding the alien device now. They were in real trouble. This ship will be on us at any moment, Bullard stated in what Walter thought as an unhelpful, alarmed tone. Walter marveled at Danica. Can she type faster on an alien keyboard than on a human one? Lieutenant, we don't have a lot of time. I know your ship is undamaged. What happened? What are you doing out here? Danica demanded. Bullard stared back at her. Walter felt the hairs on the back of his neck start to stand, imagining the Vandal ship getting closer. I get that you don't trust me, but this is your last chance. Tell me what happened out there. If you have nothing to add, I need you to get off my ship, Danica said this matter-of-factly while she pulled her spacesuit back on. We have a job to do, she said, snapping her chest plate closed. Walter felt sick. Jellyfish, don't stand there. Ping the drones. There was no way Walter would turn anything back on as long as those beasts roamed around out there. You have drones. Bullard asked in surprise. Cameras. They're on automatic, mapping the area and gathering footage. I suspect one is following that ship, Danica said as Walter peered out the front. Lieutenant Bullard, if no one survives this attack, you know what this means. Danica floated for the terminal again and pulled the spherical keyboard up. A lot of innocent lives were lost on Aramis. If we don't tell the story, then more lives will be needlessly lost. What do you want? Bullard mumbled. I'm sorry, dear. What was that? She zipped her suit up and reached for her helmet. What is it you want to know? He said. Walter stared at Bullard floating lamely nearby, defeated. Now, was that so hard? Danica snapped her helmet on, flipping up the faceplate and turned back to the keyboard. There was a battle here, in the middle of nowhere. How'd it start? Our fleet entered Quantum in combat formation, headed to Aramis, said Bullard, rubbing his eyes. 1 million clicks from our orbit entry point. We dropped out, interdicted. We stumbled, fought, then out of nowhere, an alarm from the front caused everyone to jump. Walter pushed off to the front so fast that he passed the pilot seat and hit the curved window. Bullard grasped onto the handrail by the hatch, reached out to Walter and pulled him to the seat. They didn't need to read the alarm message. They spotted a large vessel on approach through the debris. The claw-like silhouette confirmed an unmistakable Vandal ship. The powerful searchlights turned toward them, obscuring the Vandal ship. They watched as spikes reached out and pulled in debris. We can't let them do this, Bullard said, pointing out the window. I hope they don't find us as possible salvage, Walter pointed out. No, you don't understand. There are vital things in this field, things that I need to protect, Bullard argued. What we really need is cover so that you can continue your story, Danica said from the back. We're out of time, Bullard said, and turned as Walter muttered to himself. Danica reached into the mess of wires and flicked a switch. A black tentacle-like appendage reached out from under the console, with the interface visible at the tip. Danica stroked it like a pet. The whole ship began to hum. Walter nudged Bullard, who turned around to see a haze drift down the cockpit window like water. They won't see us in this. She floated into the cockpit and peered out. The ship seemed to be engulfed in a black mist. Amazing, Bullard remarked, trying to peer through the haze, then turning to Danica. But it might be too late. Another alarm went off in the front cabin. The alarm notification transfixed Walter's gaze. Collision, he voiced. Out of the haze, a multi-fingered metal arm swooped in and grasped their ship. Walter listened to the loud crunch of metal. Bullard pushed off to the back, Danica in tow. The ship swung back and forth, Walter rattling around the cockpit like a coin shaken inside a tin can. Sparks shot out of every console. Walter pulled himself toward a panel behind the pilot's seat, hit an emergency button, and pulled the main breaker. The sparks ceased, and the back bay blew open. He gripped the bottom of the pilot's seat to prevent himself being pulled into space. The air whooshed out as loud as a tornado, and silence. Only the sound of his breath was left behind. He pulled himself into the back just as the light shone into the fishbowl cockpit, yanking himself out of view. He spotted Danica and had no idea how she managed to not be pulled out of the back. But unbelievably, there she was, still typing. Walter peered around for Bullard, his eyes not adjusted to the light. Bullard was gone, but he wore a spacesuit a lot better than the one Walter had. Plus, he was a fighter pilot. He would be fine. Walter moved over to Danica and thought that they had nowhere to hide. The ship lurched as another ship part was torn away. He touched her shoulder, hearing the dull thump of Danica's fingers as they typed. She didn't respond. This is insane, Danny. Is the story really more important than our lives? He knew his words would sound like an indistinct murmur. Not that it mattered. She always ignored him. But she turned. The ship shuddered again. How much longer until the hull collapses? He could barely make out her frightened face as a shower of sparks sputtered like fireflies. Walter wanted to escape. There was no need to be here anymore, and his footage, her story, would be lost forever. Danica turned to the dark tangle of equipment and reached out for a breaker arm. All her secret alien equipment drew from an equally unknown power source. Her features became clearer in the semi-darkness, and Walter didn't see fear, but also a resolve. His mouth dropped open. He looked back at the breaker. They both held on as the ship swung away from them. Walter recovered next to Danica, sucked in a deep breath, and pushed back the swell of sorrow in his chest. This meant their death. The Vandal would not allow them to get away with transmitting the story. Every Vandal ship in the area would be on them in minutes. He gathered all his strength and nodded. He felt his hand being grasped by Danica's. A sweet gesture, he thought. Then he realized that she was pulling his hand up the breaker. Again, the ship veered, slamming into the opposite bulkhead. Pain shot through his body, but Walter refused to allow it to stop him. He grabbed Danica and kicked off toward the breaker. They floated toward the tangle of wires, the ship vibrating in violent jolts, their bodies floating calmly toward the breaker. Together, they gripped the handle as if their lives depended on it. Perhaps they did. They pulled. The cargo bay sprang to life. Life, unlike that of a human ship, an organic tentacle pulsated with energy, reached outside of the comms array on top. The end of the tentacle wore a shiny metal cap, a wire harness. The tentacle took aim and jabbed itself into the array's maintenance port. Now, the ship lit up, powered by a distinct organic cousin. Walter watched the transmitter send a repeated burst at a strength powerful enough to cook and open comms in the area. Danica sent it all, unedited, no framing, no makeup, sacrificing her life for the story. He watched the transmission scroll by on the screen and spotted the first sentence, short and to the point. A once-a-lifetime scoop. "We are at war." He felt a lump in his throat. The ship jerked wildly to the port. Walter and Danica were thrown against the opposite bulkhead. He grabbed her, holding tight as they bounced into a loose cargo net and fell halfway out of their ship. They found themselves floating in black mist. The cargo net came loose, and they floated away, helpless. The Vandal ship struggled to finish off the news van, the cloud of mist persisting. Then, Walter watched the Vandal connect with something solid. Parts flew out, and he spotted the transmission array floating in pieces. He knew the transmission had ceased. Danica gripped his arm. He looked at her. She pointed in the distance, yelling something, her muffled voice resonating through her hands, gripping his suit. She asked him something. But what? Walter looked at their dead ship and spotted a grapple cable trailing limp in space. The spotlight turned toward them. Walter watched the flower-like bloom of metal spikes turn a murderous eye toward them. A streak of light caused Walter to flinch. The Vandal planned to gun them down. He opened his eyes and spotted a streak of rounds, but the wrong angle. A bright light. An explosion. Metal pieces tearing into their spacesuits. The Vandal swooped off, chased by another ship. Bullard? The two fighters jockeyed for position in a soft arc around Walter and Danica. But then he noticed another pursuer. The second ship was far too small. One of his drones. The Finch? Walter laughed out a tear. "Go, you little bastard! Someone is going to find the best combat footage ever." Walter felt faint. He couldn't breathe. The suit was constricting against his body. He felt cold. Very cold. Danica's grip on his arm grew soft. He scanned again for his drone and found it still chasing the Vandal ship. A second bright light swooped in. A missile. The Vandal ship tried to dodge, but too late. An explosion ripped through the spiny hull. The wounded ship spun for a few seconds and then exploded in a spectacular display. "You got it, you little piece of shit! You got it!" Walter cried.